Rock the Ripple. Rock the Ripple. The Rock the Ripple podcast with Narita McInnes.
Let's do this.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rock the Ripple podcast. I'm your host, Narita McInnes. It is so awesome to be here with you as always. And today is another very exciting day because I am joined by another very special guest. He is a worldly and very knowledgeable man with experience and great success in the fields of engineering and international marketing. He is somewhat of what I would like to call a guru when it comes to gold and silver. He is the co-founder of As Good as Gold Australia. Of course, I am talking about Brian Paynes. Brian, welcome to the show.
And good morning, Narita. How are you?
I am really good, and I'm so excited that you're on the podcast today because you have so much wisdom, Brian, when it comes to gold and silver and a lot of other things as well too, let's be honest. But for those who may not have come across you before and don't know much about you, do you want to do a bit of an intro as to who is Brian Paynes just to kick it off, and then we can sink our teeth into some more wisdom from there?
Yeah, well, it does go back a long way. I'm sorry to say that I turned 70 this year, so there's 70 years of experience from day one.
Spring chicken, Brian, spring chicken.
Yeah, spring chicken. But I will say to your audience that I have goals to the early 90s. So, yeah, there are a lot of things I want to do just yet. So there's a good 20 years ahead of me, and probably with the experiences that you have in life, right, you can then talk about those experiences and really enjoy it. So, yeah, a little bit of background. You mentioned the fact that there was, in my earlier days, we had an engineering business. It was a family engineering business. It only started off small, but all great enterprises generally start small. Except for the one little joke that we quite often have in our business, or the business of engineering, because there's a lot of expenditure and things like that. And the joke went always like this: How do you start a small business, right? And the answer was, you just start with a big one. And you'll get a small one. Yeah, that's what happens. That's the engineering business. But anyway, yeah, look, I started with my father as an apprentice. I haven't got university degrees or any one of these things. But another terminology of it, you enter the school of hard knocks. So you get knocked down a couple of times, you just got to get up. Right. So anyway, I started at the age of 17, being an apprentice for our engineering company. I went through the trade school areas, and by the time I was 21, finished the apprenticeship. But that was, obviously just the start. But before then, my father, I mean, he was no great scholar. He was a very good toolmaker. Now, toolmakers were used to help manufacture motor cars, the white goods industries like refrigerators, washing machines, and all that sort of stuff. So he learnt on a hands-on. He did never want to be in sales. He couldn't stand sales, right? And at that age, at my age of 21, I didn't really want to be in sales as well. I just thought we'd poddle along and just move our engineering business from one place to another. But in the mid-70s, my brother joined me, my older brother, and he came from General Motors, so same sort of background. And in the mid to late 70s, we said to one another, we got to do better than this. Small operation. I think we employed 5 people. So we just said we had to do better than this. So we had to think of ways in which to expand. And the only way to do it was really make your own product, right? So we started making our own product. And that in the mid-80s started to take off. We had all of the automotive in Australia buying our product range. So you're talking about Toyota, Ford, General Motors, Mitsubishi. Back then it was Chrysler. There was even Leyland and Nissan and so forth. So it expanded to Australia. Then in the late 80s, we could see that there were a lot of imports that were competing with us. And we just knew that we'd lose a percentage of the market because they were coming in cheaper than ours. So we couldn't really compete in that area. So what we did, why don't we expand? Why doesn't our engineering company expand? Right. So we went to Canada. And it took us a number of years, about 3 years, before we found an agent. We found an agent in Canada, and that really blew our mind once we got the right person in Canada, because in Canada serviced the United States in the automotive industry, and that was huge business. So whereas we were moving along nicely in Australia, moving or manufacturing product in quantities of 100 or maybe 200 parts of one another, we weren't supplying panels for cars, we were supplying the parts that made the panels. So anyway, 100 to 200 in any one of our volume runs was about average. We got our first order from Canada, and it was 2,000 of this, 2,000 of that. And by the time we said this is going to take us about 3 to 4 months to fulfill, anyway, about 6 weeks later, we got another order for the same quantity. So we had to say to our Canadian agents, right, hang on, hold on a minute, hold on. We just can't deal with these volumes, but we will deal with the volumes, but we need to have more time. So we took a 12-month break. They were quite happy with this 12-month break, and we spent in those days, the late 1980s, we spent probably $1.5 million on 3 or 4 machines to improve our productivity, to improve quality and things like that. So. And by the way, we didn't have 1.5 in the bank. 1.5 million was a lot of money, so we borrowed most of that. Anyway, so about 12 months, 18 months later, we started to export to Canada, and that grew because we went to Canada a number of times, obviously, and to support the agent, and we met some European people. And they came up to us. It was a bit of a convention, and the owner of this particular agency from Italy came up to us and said, "Do you have anybody in Europe? Would you like to expand into Europe?" And of course, the answer is yes. It has never been no, we can't do it. Right? There's always been yes, we can do it, but let's look at how. So we expanded into then Italy, which he branched out obviously to the Italian car making firms, which is the big one being Fiat. But then he had connections in Germany, he had connections in France, Portugal, pretty well all of the European areas where they were manufacturing motor cars. So that was from Europe. It went then back to the United States through Canada, right, into Mexico. Then we went into South Africa, and then we went into the Asian countries. Now, you wouldn't think that we could compete in the Asian countries, but we could under certain items that we were manufacturing. Not everything, but some. So anyway, at the end of the day, at the end of, let's say by the mid-1990s, we had 18 countries buying our product, international product range. And so the whole thing there was we also, by the year 2000, we had done quite well. I'm very, very busy, but we had done quite well. But we could see that unless we did a few changes to the way we processed our manufacturing, we may not be in a stable environment. We may not be as good as what we thought we were. And what I mean by that is there was 2 things we had to compete with. Right? It wasn't a manufacturing part. Right? We had to compete with interest rates of other countries and exchange rates of other countries. Forget everything else. You forget the quality control issues. Everybody has got the ISO 9000s and quality control instruments like that. So, but you could not deviate from the fact that each country has their own exchange rate with their currency, and they have their interest rates. Our major competitor back then was South Korea, right? And we had Mitsubishi people who were going to South Korea buying some of their parts, and eventually it was just about nearly all, right? But when they came back, we'd ask questions, what was South Korea like? And he said, everything's brand new. We can't even believe it over here, in Australia, because we for Mitsubishi to expand in Australia, they would buy pre-owned Mitsubishi Japan parts, right? Their press lines, their automation lines, they come in from Japan, but they've already been used for 10 years. But in South Korea, it was brand new, right? Everything's brand new. And we asked, well, how, if they're brand new and they've only been manufacturing for 10 years or so, how do they get the money? Oh, the government supports it. the government gives incentives to support the purchasers. So, of course, our government back then, we had a little bit of support, but, they'd give in one hand, and the governments do this generally, they give in one hand and they take from the other, right? So at the end of the day, there was no support. And when I say take from the other, taxation, right? So we decided in 2005, we decided in 2005, under the education of a gentleman that we've always listened to, his name was Peter Daniels, right? He said, guys, you have to get out of manufacturing, otherwise you'll be trodden on, right? And he was a very successful real estate developer, real estate owner, had a long-term business in real estate in his younger days. He was at this stage about 65, he'd retired. And the bottom line was that he had a lot of world influence. He was also a very strong Christian, and he was often about in America and Europe, always doing talking, always doing good talks. But anyway, he said, you just got to get out. And we did not, and in the beginning, we avoided the getting out. We listened to him, but we avoided the getting out because we were still, at that stage, developing our engineering business. So, but in 2005, we heeded his information, and 2008, actually, we closed the doors. We did do a little bit of work for the mining industry because the automotive was, disappearing. Manufacturing was disappearing. Right? So we did a bit of work for the mining industry, but bottom line is we didn't have enough education in that field. So after 3 years and losing, it was about $300,000 or $400,000 over that period of time, we said, no, we've had enough. So in 2008, we closed the doors, paid the bills, and did everything we possibly can to retire on out of the engineering field. We're too young to retire. I didn't want to retire, but we had to, obviously get rid of all the bills and so forth. That took about 12 months after selling machines and things like this. So 2008 to 2010, we decided, we did have 2 years off. We had those 2 years, 2008, 2010, didn't do anything. Right. The automotive business or manufacturing business back in those days is another word for describing the manufacturing in Australia back then was you were under the pressure cooker business, always under pressure. Right. So we took 2 years off and didn't do much at all. But we got bored, after 2 years. Obviously our bank accounts were going down a little, right? But so we said, we need to do something about that, but we got to get out of the boredom. What did we know, right? We knew, the only thing that we knew outside of engineering is that we were, I mentioned Peter Daniels, he said, you got to save in gold and silver, you got to save in precious metals. He said, if you save in currency, right, and my partner always talks about the difference between currency and money, right? If you save in currency, which is what we've got in our wallets, what we have in our bank accounts, you may not see the paper stuff because of electronic ways of paying bills, but it is currency. All governments today have currency. No governments have money. Money is gold, silver, physical form. Okay? Now, so we knew we'd been saving in gold and silver since 1997. This was now 2010. And we said, okay, let's have a look. And I came across an article out of Britain, and I said, gee, if he can do it, so can I, or so can we. So we sat around the kitchen table, and we also had our third partner. There's three partners of As Good as Gold, and Jared was my partner's son. He was about 20, what would he have been, about 22, yeah, because he's about 32 now. 22 years of age, but he would run rings around my partner and myself on the computer, right? I would say, okay, we've got to register a business name. So we thought the business name up. By the way, it comes As Good as Gold Australia, came from the fact that we thought silver at that time was as good as gold. Right, so we said, all right, that sounds like a good name, As Good as Gold Australia, and we developed the silver business as in the first 2 or 3 years. But what we would have done, Darren and I, my partners here, we would have said, okay, we got to register the business. Let's go to our accountant, get him to do this, that, and everything else. And 2 weeks later, you got a business name. And Jared goes on his computer, dials into the right company to register a business name. Half hour later, the name is registered, right? And we couldn't believe it. We said, okay, well, it looks like we're on a winner here. And we registered the business name As Good as Gold Australia. So how did we begin? Now that we've, you know who we are, where we've been, and we were quite successful, but we knew we had to get out, right? Yeah. And so what happened then is that we did study. We just did lots and lots of study. So we went on YouTube. We went to all the different aspects of what gold is all about, what silver is all about. And it took us back right through to the Egyptian days. You're talking about Ben-Hur, well, that was the Roman days, so even before then, right? But, you found out that gold and silver had always been money. There's no electronics back then, but there was no such thing as, I think the Chinese had used wood bark at some stage for money, but that was a dictatorship type thing. But gold and silver was money, and they would either measure their gold and silver in granules, or the Romans decided this has got to be better than this, and they decided to make coins, and they could do it. Very oddly shaped coin, but it was a coin, right? Gold and silver. They called one of their coins was a denarius, right? A Roman denarius. But anyway, if we go back to 5,000 years, gold and silver was used as money. Then we go into the Roman next stage, the Romans, where gold and silver equivalent, and it was 100% gold and silver, as close as possible to 100%. But the fall of the Roman Empire was all about the demise of the currency, or the demise of the gold coin, because they started off at probably 97%, something like this. But when the Roman Empire fell, right, the gold in a gold coin was 2%. How did they do that? They had some wondrous ways of doing it as well. When they melted the gold, right, they'd put some tin in there just at the start, put a little bit of tin, 10%, so it didn't change much. Then as their armies would grow, and we all know that armies cost money, and eventually wars cost more money, they would put more tin, more nickel, more everything else, right, into that gold coin. So the gold eventually changed, but because it was gradual, the gold colour changed, in a very small way on each time they did a new coin, right? But eventually their gold coins were 2% gold, 98% nothing, right? So that's how they had inflation. That's the way inflation worked back then.
Yeah.
So you go then you go to the Greeks, right? And the Greeks more or less started with gold currency, and they more or less did the same. If you look at these generations, right? Wars were always part of it. Over the long term, we're talking every 100 years, you'd find there's lots of countries battling away, right? But what they battled for was not only land, but the treasures of the land. And the treasures of the land was always precious metals and emerald stones and rubies and things like that. So they'd always, and these wars wouldn't last very long, right? They couldn't last very, very long, because the amount of gold out there to pay for their armies, right, they didn't have enough, and that's why they diluted the coins to pay for their armies. But, these wars would only last three months, maybe up to 12. And then they'd move on, right? So from the Greeks, then you go to the Portuguese, right? And from this point on, year 1400, this point on, you would see a regime change every 100 or so years. Might be 90, might be 85, might be 105, 110, right? But every 100 years, you see a regime change. Portuguese in 1400, then it was the Spaniards, right, Spanish galleons, we've all heard of those, and the ships that went down and they find the treasures 800 years later, right? And so after the Spaniards, you would get the Dutch, then you get the French, then you'd get the British, right? And the British were there, obviously, between 1800, let's say 1800 to 1900, right, up until 1913 in reality, because at 1913 the American dollar came into being through the United States Federal Reserve, right? United States Federal Reserve notes. So the British, they had still had a fair bit of control, the British, up until the First World War, 1914. But the British also found that America, who supplied the Britons a lot of armoury, the Americans didn't want to be paid in British pound notes. Funny, isn't it? They didn't want to be paid in any paper. The Americans wanted the real thing. The Americans wanted gold, right, in payment for the cannons and all the rifles that they were making for the British to fight the First World War. See, the Americans didn't come into the First World War till 1916, halfway through. So they were in there for about a year and a half with the Americans fighting the First World War. But it was very interesting. If you have a look at those years, the 1910 was when the American bankers, right, they got together, right, and in 1913 the Federal Reserve was formed. Now, before then, throughout the 1800s, and I think it was about 1820 and about 1840, there was two central banks in the United States. They only lasted 8 years each, and the new incoming presidents each time got rid of them, right? Didn't want a bar of central banks, because they knew through past history that central banks always dilute the money supply with regards to the gold standard, right? And they revert to paper printing. So in 1913, the Federal Reserve comes along. 1914 is the start of the First World War. Rather coincidental, but that's the way it worked. So the First World War and America and the United States, they take over the regime. They go from 1913 to right now. You have a look at that. That's 110 years. What would you say we're ready for now? Another regime change. Might be next year, but I think it's probably 3 to 5 years away. All right. So this being the case, we've now looked at the last 5 years. Now I want to have a talk about the debt levels of many countries, but mainly of the United States, right? And the United States obviously started in the 1800s, 1790, so let's close enough to 1800s, and right through to 2024. Now, before I go into this, what I will say is that the common factor of every regime that has gone down from really being right up high to right down low and disappearing is debt. It is 100% about debt. So, because, if you think about it, Narita, if you made a bad mistake, if you do a business decision that doesn't go well, and you know it's not doing well, but you need to fund it. You think it's going to get better and get better and get better, and you keep on funding it until the day you just decide to say no more. And that's usually is when you're broke. Unfortunately, that's what happens. And so many businesses go into bankruptcy because they've run out of money, right? And it's the same with regime governments. They run out of money, right? The longer we go in history, obviously each country finds a different way of pursuing their dreams, but their dreams are all about creating more debt. I'm going to show you how from 1790 to 2024, how the debt has increasing in the United States, which is, they print the US dollar, so I got to talk about the United States, right? I'm going to talk about over the maybe 50 presidencies they've had, because they change about every 8 years, right? But I'll talk about 5 throughout the history, all right? But what it's going to get back to is that you have a look, before I do that, you have a look at when President Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971, right? That's 50 odd years ago, all right? 53. But in 1971, the US debt was $406 billion. Sounds a lot of money, but it's not a lot compared to these days. 406 billion was when President Nixon took us off the gold standard. If you move forward now 53 years, it is 33,000 billion. From 406 to 33,000 billion. That is a lot of debt. Yeah. And it doesn't go down. It's always increasing. And I'll give you some examples. I've got a book here called The US Presidents. And in this book, there's about 50, it's the life of right up to Donald Trump. And you find out the debt levels of every incoming president. All right, so let's start with the first incoming president of the United States, 1789 to 1797. George Washington. Not too bad. Look, these guys are great. In the early days, they were great. They did try to control the amount of spending. But anyway, he started with $71 million debt because they did own, the British had borrowed from the French and so forth and so forth. They're borrowing from everywhere, but they landed with an incoming debt of 71 million. And when he finished his 8-year term, it was 82 million. All right, 71 to 82. So then we have a look at one of the next presidents, 1801 to 1809, and this was Thomas Jefferson, great president. $83 million to $57 million. So he took it down. Right? He took it down. He's one of the very few presidents who actually took it down. Now you've got to remember back then we're talking dollars backed by gold. Yeah. Not talking paper. Infinite paper out there. So 83 million to 57 million. So we move to the next one, few years, and we talk about Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is my favourite. Absolutely 100% my favourite president. 1829 to 1837, right? And he's one of the presidents that got rid of the second central bank. So there was no central bank after he got into power. But anyway, he came in at 58 million and he left 8 years later with a debt of $337,000.
Wow.
Wow. $337. That's about what I'm worth. Yeah. But 0.3 of a million as against starting with 58 million. He was a great president. He hated debt, right? Mm. So the next one that I will talk about, Abraham Lincoln. We all heard about Abraham Lincoln. And, look, he came in at a pretty hard time. There was controversy over the North and the South, having slave labour and things like that. I understand where he came from, but at the end of the day, he created a mess in a monetary sense, right? So he started with a debt level. Got to remember that Jefferson ended with 337,000. Abraham Lincoln started with a debt of 90 million, right? 90 million. But he ended 8 years later at 2.6 billion, or in other words, 2,600 million. 90 million to 2006. That civil war cost the United States massive amounts of debt, right? So we move forward and we talk about Woodrow Wilson, his 1913. Here we go, 1913, the Federal Reserve gets their claws into the US dollar, right? And so for the next 8 years between 1913 and 1921, right, 2.9 billion to 24 billion. So if you don't know, again, 2.9 is 2,900 million. To 24,000 million, all right? So a fair bit of an increase in the debt levels. So, and that's with 8 years, that's with 8 years of the Federal Reserve in operation. The Federal Reserve loved it because every time the Federal Reserve lends out money, they get that money back, or supposedly get that money back with interest, right? So we'll talk about interest a little bit later, all right? So the next one we got here is Barack Obama. Now, a lot of people who don't know the monetary history, and I don't blame them, it's not something that you read on a daily basis, but the bottom, I do, because I love the subject, right? I also not only love the subject of money, but the subject of becoming free and having freedom in your life. away from debt levels. But Barack Obama has always, everybody I talk to outside of my own close circle of friends says, oh, he's a great president, he did this and he did that and everything else. But let's have a look at what he didn't do, right? And in 2009, he came into power, right, with a debt level of 11.9 trillion, right? Now a trillion is now 1,000 billion, right? There's a lot of money, right? Or a lot of currency, I should say, right? 11.9 trillion, and he left with 20 trillion. He nearly doubled it. He nearly doubled the trillions of dollars of debt. Well, no wonder you can promise people if we print the money, right? And that's what these presidents, not only in the US, but every other country in the world today. Yes, you can promise anything you like if you can convince the people that your paper currency is worth something, but it's not worth a cracker. So 11.9 to 20 trillion, nearly double. And of course, we have Donald Trump. You know, I think he has some of his ethics a little bit debatable, right? But he knew at least he had run businesses. He had run businesses at a profit. He knew what how not to lose money at a business, but at a government level, not quite so. So he started with 20 trillion deficit after Obama, and he left at 28 trillion. Right, so it's just another $8 trillion. It's just another 8 trillion. It's a drop in the ocean. But you can actually see, outside of one president, they couldn't reduce the debt levels, right? Especially after 1971. We went from gold standards to paper standards. Right, the government would go to the US Treasury and say, "We need another trillion." Last 2 months ago, you heard a report saying, oh, gee, in the last 100 days, the deficit has increased by 1 trillion. 100 days for $1 trillion. That means that 3 trillion, 4 trillion every year. You know, they talk trillions as if it was like currency out of your pocket. Right? And they just don't get it. And it's politicians, as Alistair MacLeod would say, who's my favourite economist, he's a British economist, he would say, these politicians are totally incompetent. None of them have been in business. Donald Trump has, but you can just imagine how many fights he would have internally, right? So these politicians that we put in power today are totally incompetent because they have no business skills. They don't know what deficits and credits are, right? And so they go to their banks, the central bank, oh, I need some more money. Yep, here we are. No, they forget about the interest that's due. The interest is payable. Let me tell you, because we're going to go further. Now we've done a little bit of the debt levels. We're going to go to the history of the Federal Reserve. And the history of the Federal Reserve, it's not a long subject, not because it's a long one if I really get into it, but I'm not going to. But the Federal Reserve officially started in 1913. It actually was talked about by the American bankers and European bankers in 1910. So there were some European and American bankers that got together on a little island just offshore from Carolina. I think it's South Carolina. Anyway, the island is called Jekyll Island, right? Jekyll Island. Sounds like Jekyll and Hyde. It's about the same principle, but the island is called Jekyll Island, but it was owned by J.P. Morgan. Right? So J.P. Morgan was talking to his bankers, and he was saying to his mainly bankers on the East Coast, he would be saying things like, gee whiz, these years are good for us, but, we're being held up by stagecoach robberies, Bonnie and Clyde, and they're taking all our gold from our depositories. We can't do that. What are we going to do about it? And what they came up with, let's change the gold to paper notes. So if there was a robbery, they just replace it with more paper, right? Didn't affect them one little bit. So in 1910, the group of people that bankers that were involved were 2 American bankers and 2 European bankers. The Americans are the Rockefeller family and the J.P. Morgan family. On the European side, it was the Rothschilds, so everybody has probably heard of them, the Rothschilds. and another German family called Kuhnloeb, Kuhnloeb, Kuhnloeb. They're very silent in Europe, but they are very powerful people, right? And look, there's a great little quote out there that says, and I love it, it says, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Right, and there's no denying that. You can see it, you can write it on your blackboard, it hasn't changed for a long time. If you have ultimate power, you get corruption, right? So, Federal Reserve, so in 1913, the Federal Reserve of the United States, so they don't call it a central bank. They didn't want to have a central bank. They already had two, right? Two in the past. They got rid of them. So they said, no, we won't call this a central bank. We call it a Federal Reserve, right? So the Federal Reserve starts in 1913. And now I'm going to ask the public, the audience here, I'm going to ask a question. And I want you to think about it. You will think about it. And you maybe get the answer, but very few people do. But the question is, I'm going to take you back to 1913. It's now 2024, but I'm going to take you back. We're going to do our history lesson in 1913. And we're going to knock on the front door. You personally are going to knock on the front door of the Federal Reserve, right? And you are going to borrow the first US dollar that they print from their printing presses. So, in this occasion, there's lots of people behind you. You're the first customer of the Federal Reserve. You're not allowed to use, they want to get rid of gold and silver because that's detrimental, that gets stolen from the robberies, right? And so you're going to be told to use US dollar notes. So you're going to borrow the first one, right? It's no different from our own currency today of the Australian dollar, $50 note, $100 note. You notice I don't say a $5 note because you can't even buy a penny stick with that. But look, so you're going to borrow the first dollar. Now, $1 US dollar in 1913 would buy you a week's worth of groceries. A cup of coffee was 3 pennies or 3 cents. No, $4.50 today, back then, 3 cents, right? So a dollar was worth a lot of money. Tap, tap on the door. Thank you very much. You borrow $1. My question is, whenever you borrow money, whether back in 1913 or 2024, whenever you borrow money, you pay an interest level on that borrowing. So you've got the first dollar. How do you pay the interest? Got to remember. I'll just let you think about that. You got the first dollar. Nobody else has got any. There's nobody else out there with dollars, right? You're the first one. And you got to pay the interest. How am I going to? Hang on, I got a dollar. I've got the dollar because I want to spend it. I've got to buy goods and services. How do I pay the interest? And you think about this for a bit. Gee, that question's never been posed before me. And the answer is you have to borrow a second one. So you have to find the interest on the second one. On the first one, you have to borrow a second one. I have had some doozies in the past. Let me tell you, one person said, well, I wouldn't spend the whole dollar, I only spend 95 cents, right? And I've got the 5% for the interest. Then I said, what do you do from now? You have to borrow another one, don't you? But this time around you got inflation, so you might have to borrow two, right? So eventually we came back to the fact that yes, you always have to borrow more to pay the interest on the first one. So you never get out of debt. Never, ever. Mathematically, you put Einstein in front of that equation, he'd say, yep, you are totally right. You can't get out of debt because you're using paper money that is printed out of nowhere. By the way, paper money out of nowhere is called fiat currency. That's what we use today.
Yes.
And fiat currency, fiat comes from a Latin word, out of nowhere. So the whole concept of paper currency is it's not only you, but your country is always in debt. Now, can any individual get out of debt? Yes, they can, right? But once that dollar, whether it be American dollar, Australian dollar, English pound, Japanese yen, once that dollar is into existence, right, unless you have a depression, and that means they take the dollars out of existence, right? It's always in existence. You may pay off your debt, but that debt goes on to somebody else. Those currencies go on to somebody else. So the country in which you're living in is still in debt because that's what it's borrowed.
Yeah.
And so the debt, the interest, and yet I pondered for some time on. I heard this statement from a number of economists paying the interest on the debt. I said, well, who collects the interest? I thought, geez whiz, so they must be pretty financially okay. And at the end of the day, because there's a number of ways, a number of reasons, a number of answers, buying bonds, governments buying treasuries, so people buying treasuries, buying bonds and things like this, and loaning money to different countries and whatever. But at the end of the day, the interest goes back to the owners of the Federal Reserve that started the ball rolling. So if you have a look at today, there's talk about Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk being the richest people in the world. They are rich, no doubt about that. But they're using currency. Who prints the currency? The banks print the currency. The owners of the banks are the richest people in the world. All right? Now, your bank manager on your local corner or, nearest to you that you deal with, look, he's okay. I have no problems with him. I just don't like central bankers, right? Because central bankers have got no heart, right? They will just loan and loan and loan, and they don't give a damn, right? Yeah, they don't give a damn if you go broke, because that loan money goes on to somebody else. They just collect the interest day by day, year by year, and they are the wealthiest people on this earth, and they are into the trillions. So good luck to Jeff Bezos and these gentlemen. I have no intention of being that rich. I don't see any point. But the bottom line here is that they thought of an idea, and that idea is taken off, and so they've become very, very wealthy. But they're the rich people in the world. All right, the central banks that print the money. Okay, so we still have the Federal Reserve today. They're still printing, as I said, 1 trillion every 100 days. And this will not stop until it does. And I of the opinion that, obviously I want to, but they'll be forced to. I'm of the opinion that the gold standard will come back, and it will come back within a 3 to 5 year period. I just cannot see this trillions of dollars of printing being consistent year in, year out. That doesn't mean they won't try certain other methods before the central banks are forced to use gold as money. Those things that they may force upon us for a small amount of time, they won't endure for long periods of time, but things like CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, they'll try that. They'll try tokenization. They'll try these little things that put your mind off of debt levels. At the end of the day, it's all fiat currency, all paper currency out of nowhere. Right, and those ideas will last 6 to 12 months, and then they say, okay, we got this inflation. We are dead in the water. Right, what worked before? What worked in history? Gee whiz, there's periods of hundreds of years where they used a gold standard. Right? Let's have a look at gold. And in fact, I can tell you right now. Now, this is a nation that has been under controversy for a long time with their banking and their printing of notes, but the country of Zimbabwe, right? Now, they're only small, but it's got to start somewhere. So Zimbabwe last week announced that they are now, after trialling different types of currencies, right, and just inflation like you wouldn't believe, because they can't control their spending, right? So in the first 3 months of this year, they had 55% inflation rate. 55% inflation rate, the first 3 months. And the new incoming president said, I've had enough. Right? Last week he announced we are going to a fully gold-backed currency. So there you go. We've got one little nation now starting to see the errors in their ways and wanting to use gold in their money supply. It is very interesting that Russia is talking about using gold to back their trading trading. So in other words, not their internal currency, not yet, but they're trading between the BRIC nations, right? Russia wants to be paid for its oil, its minerals, all of its exports. They want to be paid in gold or rubles, the Russian ruble. You say to yourself, well, as your country, how do I buy a Russian ruble, right? You have a look, you dig a little bit deeper. They'll accept gold to buy the Russian ruble. So gold and Russian rubles is what they want to accept, what they will be accepting for their export trade. As a starting point, the countries in the BRICS will start using, they'll say, yep, good idea, we're getting out of the US dollar, good idea, right, we're going to use our own currencies. Russia will say, and there's a couple of other nations in there in BRICS, but Russia will say, hang on, it's all right to say I'm going to use our currencies and you can trust us, but unfortunately we want to make sure we can trust you, right, and we can trust gold, physical gold. Right, so the individual currencies of the BRICS nations will eventually all go to a gold standard. Right, it might take a couple of years, might take 3 or 4, but at the end of the day, the Western world will be coerced and forced into a gold standard. Right, in other words, gold has to back the money. Otherwise, we're going to have inflation like you wouldn't believe, and get ready for it. Along with inflation, you have high interest rates. With high interest rates, how are you going to pay the mortgages? So there's a little bit of history on the Federal Reserve. I'm now going to show you how a gold standard works. What does a gold standard do comparing it to currency, normal currency that we've been used to? So I've got some notes over here and I'll run through them. Okay, let's have a look here. This comes from my British economist who I listen to regularly. In fact, I can pick up the phone and talk to Alistair McLeod most times without any interference. Right? If he's doing something, he'll ring me back. Right? But he and I put together a series of pricings and showing how gold works in the system. And you'd be surprised of what the results are. Right? Now, I did this going back before Alistair quoted these particular items of interest. Right? I did it for the motor car industry, and I did it because we were forced out of the motor car industry because of 2 things: interest rates and exchange rates. So let's start with what Alistair was talking about. The prices of oil, copper, scrap iron and steel, automotive manufacturing and real estate is what we're going to be talking about. Price of oil between 1950 to now, all right? 1950 to now, so we're talking 70 years. The price of oil in US dollars is up 39 times, or in other words, 3,900%. In 70 years, the price of oil is up 3,900%. That's a barrel of oil in US dollars. You got to remember, what are cars? How do we actually move a motor car? Right, with petrol. Right, where does petrol come from? Oil. Right. So in US dollars, up 39 times, 3,900%. If you look at a barrel of oil today in gold, it is down 30%. From 70 years ago to today, it is reduced by 30% in far as looking at the price of gold as against the price of a US dollar. Let's look at copper. Copper is used in everything electrical. Copper is used in building homes, the plumbing and everything else. It is a vital element that we dig out of the ground. So Alistair said, I went back and looked at 1900 to today. 1900, we're talking 120 years. And in US dollars, it's up 27 times, 2,700%. Price in gold, that same copper today, is down 70%. 120 years and it's down 70% priced in gold. This is how gold standards work. The stability is unbelievable. Scrap iron and steel. So we all need steel. We need steel for motor cars. We need steel for refrigerators. We need steel to build bridges, all sorts of stuff. In between 1934, right, and 2024, we're talking, about 90 years, right? In US dollars, the price of this of steel and scrap iron is up 69 times, or 6,900%. Gold, unfortunately, has gone up, but in gold, 32%, as against 6,900. You can see how gold is, if it was money today, the prices of all these goods would either be down or very little change over 100 years. All right? Let's talk car manufacturing. Now, I can talk about car manufacturing because I was involved in it. And as I push this point, we were only tossed out because of exchange rates, right, and interest rates, right? Every manufacturer, whether it be for the car industry, whether it be for anything, you could be manufacturing snake skins, right? It doesn't matter, The bottom line is, using currency, right, you're paying more and more and more every year. Using gold, it's the same, right? But let's look at the manufacturing of a motor car. And I go back to 1908, when Henry Ford produced the Model T Ford in 1908, and he was building his, the numbers that he was doing was about 100,000 units per year. All right, so that Model T Ford came out 110 years ago, or 115 years ago, 1908, for $360. But the dollar was backed then by gold, right? And gold was $20 an ounce. Cost 18 ounces of gold to buy your Model T Ford. So let's go to today. I know we don't have Ford as a manufacturer in this country, but I've done my sums. I know what it was back in 2017. Between 2017, 2018 to now, you probably find the Ford Falcon would be worth around $40,000 to $45,000. All right. So at $40,000 to $45,000, that is 10,500% increase from 360. But in gold, that car is not worth 18 ounces of gold, but 14 ounces of gold. So in 115 years of manufacturing, the price of a motor car has gone down from 18 ounces to 14 ounces. But I don't know if I've said this to you before, Nerida, but I'm talking about the price of gold today, which is managed by central banks all over the world, right? So officially it's about 14 ounces of gold. But I've looked at if the price of gold was not managed, because when I say managed, gold is the only competitor to the US dollar. There is no other currencies out there that competes with the US dollar, only gold. If gold was left alone and it was in the marketplace as to buy and sell whenever you wanted to, without any taxes, without any central banks getting in the way, that motor car today would be 3 ounces of gold. Because gold would not be $3,500 an ounce. It would be over $30,000 an ounce. This is not, a pie in the sky prediction, right? This is the fact that how many dollars have been printed. And if we go back to a gold standard, the gold has to cover the amount of printed dollars that are out there. And that would mean that to buy that motor car today, you would only need 3 ounces of gold, right? Because gold will be over $30,000 an ounce, right? It has to be. So you can see how gold makes the stability of money everywhere around the world. We have been competing manufacturing-wise for competing against Asian countries, especially China. I have no problem with the Chinese people. I just have a problem with central banking, right? But this is how it works. An ounce of gold in Australia is an ounce of gold. Forget about whether you price it in US dollars, yens, pounds, or whatever. It is an ounce of gold. When you dig out an ounce of gold in China, how much is it? It's an ounce of gold. The value does not change. That you don't look at it as how many Chinese yuan costs to get the ounce of gold. It's an ounce of gold is the same weight in China as the same weight in the United States and Australia. So it's only the way we dig it out. Go back 20 years, China would have used pitchforks, to dig their, gold out of the ground. Today they're a little bit more sophisticated. But back 20 years ago, we would use dynamite, bulldozers, and we would be so much more efficient, right? And so if the currencies, if the wealth of the world was based in gold, there would be no competition from the Chinese. Because it doesn't matter whether they've got 10 times, 20 times more people. You have to feed the people with the gold that you're digging out of the ground. See, the price of gold is unique. The price of gold is what it's worth, what it can buy you, not how many US dollars and how many Australian dollars there is to buy that product, right? So, being that if we're under a gold standard, everybody has a level playing field. It then gets back to your way of producing your product range. Whether that be the way you dig gold out of the ground, the way you make a motor car, the way you produce your beef, the way you produce your grains, right? Harvesting grains. You can use an old tractor of the 1950s, and you'll be there till midnight to dawn 7 days a week. But the local harvesters are here. You get 6 in a row, and they would completely pick up the grain of the fields in a day. Right? Because of sophistication of the way you do things. Technology is good, but it's not as good as having the same value for your currency. Lastly, price of a home. All right, the price of a home. Alistair talked about the price of a home in London. I look at the price of a home in Sydney, which is about the same. All right. Adelaide, I love Adelaide because it's a lot cheaper to live, right? But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, right? It's the what you pay for your home and the increase in inflation that's causing the price of homes to go up. Now, the price of a home in London in 1968. So we go back to 1968 to today, about 55 years, something like that. Difference. 1968. The median price of a London home is up 115 times, 11,500% since 1968. All right. In gold, the price is up 29%. The real estate people say, how am I going to make money if it doesn't go up in price? Well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you how. It doesn't go up in price, or 29% over 70 odd years. Because the wealth of the nation is so buoyant on a gold standard, because you're efficient, if you are, you're not under a communistic regime, right? So you are an efficient builder of things. You still are able, your salary that you get is one of the highest salaries in the world, and your salary, you buy your own home, little mortgage, small mortgage. You'll be able to save because you're not taxed to oblivion. Do you buy a second home? You save again, you buy a third home using your second home and your own home. The same principle is there. That doesn't change. But so that helps you for your retirement, by having one or two homes. You got to remember that gold is not an investment. It's not an investment. It just follows the price of all the currencies that are going up in price. So you need, in Australia now, we need $3,500 to buy that 1 ounce of gold, right? But that's immaterial. What has gone up, or maybe what has gone down. The gold has remained the same. The silver has remained the same. It's how many notes you need to pay for that 1 ounce. It's not an investment, it is money. And the other day I was talking to a group of people and said, well, when do you sell your gold? Can you ever sell it? Of course you can never sell it. Of course you can. You just build up your quantity first while this economic scenario is out there, because no good saving in currency. Right? Inflation will take care of that. No good saving in currency. You save in physical gold and physical silver, which is supposedly going up because they're printing all this currency. Gold allows for that, right? That's why gold is going up. It allows for all the currency that's being printed. And in real terms, you'll have, in this next 5-year period, if you start saving in silver and gold, you will have an immense amount of gold and silver, but its value, because of the notes being printed, the value of that gold will be so much higher.
Yeah.
If and when, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We go back to a gold standard, and look, gold's at 3,500 today, 3,550 in actual fact. It's actually up about $50 in the last probably week. But at 3,500, by the end of this year, it will be over 4,000. It'll be somewhere between 4.5 and 5, in my opinion. But I don't want to exaggerate. I hate exaggeration, so I keep down to the lows. Yeah. But it will definitely be over 4,000 an ounce. Silver, boy, it's up 10% in the last week, right? But silver has been trodden on for 50 years because of fiat currency. Silver will probably reach an increase of 50 to 60% before the end of the year. Then it will start to slow down. But it will gallop along this year because it's been trodden on for so long, right? So silver right now is about 40. If you buy a silver coin, you'll buy it for about $49. Let's say $50. If you buy kilos of silver, you'll pay a lot less. You'll pay something like $1,400 and something per kilo. It works out to be around about $42, $43 an ounce, something like that. Might be a bit more, but 45, whatever. But the bottom line will be the fact that your silver and gold in currency will look like it's going up. So this is my next point. Why do I say it looks like it's going up? The word that we have got here is inflation. So gold and silver will follow the inflation rate. But we've been told inflation is 3.5, 3.9, maybe 4%. And they want to get it down to 2%. Because 2% they can deal with, the government can deal with 2%. But 3 or 4% is too high. In the last 3 to 4 months, it stopped going down from 10% from 2 years ago to 3.5% 6 months ago. But now it's starting to go back up. The governments are now saying, maybe we may not be able to reduce interest rates. Maybe we may have to put them up again. Now, inflation. Does anybody know the real definition of inflation? And I'll guarantee it's not what the powers that be say it is. Because they say 3.5%. Of course they get 3.5. They just pick numbers out of the air. But the bottom line is, between 1985 and 1992, the government made a decision to do certain things to the description or how to work out inflation. And it's amazing. They did this, in my opinion, it is just an opinion, but they could see that pensions were going to be, massive pension plans into the near future, because they based each year their pension on the inflation rate. They would do the adjustments. So if your adjustments are tiny, therefore your pension increases are tiny, right? But they took what we call a basket of currencies, and in that basket of currencies, or basket of goods, right? So in that basket of goods, you would have everything that you paid for on a yearly basis, whether that be food, energy, materials, the building of a home, all the materials that you needed. It would be gas, it would be, for power and everything. Anyway, everything that you could think of that you had to buy, right? That's what they put in the basket. They would take January 1 through to December 31st, look at the price increases and do the calculation, right? And it worked out on average of between 8 and 9%. Right, 8 to 9% over the last 50 years. Well, they could not adjust the pension every year by 8 or 9%. So what did governments do? They decided to take out the more volatile of the items in that basket. I don't know what you call volatile, but this is how they thought about it. They took out the volatile instruments, the volatile items. There was three volatile items: food, energy, and real estate, or the roof over your head. Now, if anybody, I have never had one person come to me and say, oh, I can live without that. I can live without food, energy, and a roof over my head. No, I'm being facetious. There isn't anybody out there that can live without food, energy, and the roof over their head. They took those three items out of the way they equate for inflation. So inflation is not 3%, 3.5%. It's today somewhere between 10 and 12. It may be a little bit high, because I did say to you that gold and silver equates to, the reason why it goes up, equates to the inflation rate of the currency. Now, for the last 5 years, gold has been up 16% a year. If I look at it, 1 year it's up 15.99%. 5 years it's up 91.6. You work this out, it's 16% a year. So I think the inflation rate is 16%. But let's be conservative, let's say 12. All right, 10, 12, 14, whatever you want to make it. It's somewhere between there. But they're telling us 3.5. Look, there's one thing to tell the truth, and there's one thing to disguise the truth. They are disguising. Governments disguise the truth because it makes them look bad. It makes them look incompetent, which they are. So gold standard works. I could run through all the different products that we have seen under gold standards, and definitely from the Civil War of America. So we're talking 1865 right through to 1913. I can tell you everything what was manufactured, and we're talking about telephones and telegraph, and all the technologies that we've got today. Tell you what, they were thought of in those years. So the gold standard does not deprive you of technology. It actually gives you a better technology. Right. Gold versus real estate was another subject that comes up quite a bit when Daryl and I do our calls when we speak to people. Oh, you got to have a second home. You got to have a third home. Maybe under a gold standard. Yeah, I have no problem with that. But under a fiat currency, everybody thinks that their house is going up, right? Under a gold standard, it doesn't go up 30% over 70 years, right? But everybody, don't worry, everybody under a gold standard would have plenty of real estate. But people, I don't knock the real estate agents, right? They've had some great years. Gold has had some great years. But let's talk about gold versus real estate. Average real estate over 100 years, the average price increases is between 8 and 9%, right? I think stocks and shares is around 8.5 to 9.5%, right? So, but they don't talk about gold because that's 16%. They don't talk about that. No, don't do that. But when you buy a piece of real estate, you just don't buy a piece of real estate. You buy a home on it. And over 10 years, you have to generally repaint it. After 15 years, you probably have to supply more plumbing parts. Forget about the land taxes and the taxes to actually buy that house right from day one. People don't add that in. And when they sell that house, they don't add that in, right? And I will guarantee you, because I've read the reports, the average price per investment home, the average what you get out of it is between 3.5% and 4.5% per year. So, I know gold is a bit boring. Silver may be a bit boring, but once you own the physical, you own it. The only thing you need for maintenance, as against a home, which I've just talked about, is a feather duster. Just get the dust off the gold, right? It accumulates, dust it off, and the gold is still there. If you have an investment of anything else where you have not got your hands on it totally, it's what we call, there's always a third party. And I'll guarantee you, because you have a third party, you don't make the rules. The other person makes the rules. Even if you own a property, and I'm not saying, I am saying go out and buy a property when the time is right. If you have a property, right, you've got rental, right? You've got rental income. Governments change the laws, right? Somebody comes in, they've got pets. You can't be discriminatory, right? So you have to change the rules a little bit here. Governments come out, councils come up with increasing taxes. I looked at my council rates 12 months ago. They went up 25%. In a suburb, in our suburb, my house went up 25%. Yeah, look, I may have put $20,000, $30,000 for additions to it, right? Did this something to the garden, did some work on the areas and whatever, 25%, right? So you can't control that. You have to pay it. Now, if you say, well, I'll just put the rental up. Oh, yeah, but if people aren't getting the income, you're in a bad position, right? A poor position because you do not control it. One thing you do control under silver and gold is you have 100% control. I've pretty well talked about a lot of things that I talk about generally. Usually takes me about an hour, and when I make a phone call, or somebody phones me, I make an arrangement to call them back at a certain time, and we will talk for an hour and a quarter, hour and a half. I have some people who are really into or anti-government. And look, I'm not fond of government. I really am not fond of government because they're too big, right? Governments get too big and therefore they're very inefficient the way they do things, right? But people who love talking about that will get on, I get on the phone. Obviously, eventually I have to say, oh, I'm running out of time here. Then they start talking precious metals. But the whole point of the phone call is to make sure that you are educated to what is going on, right? And in the next 3 to 5 years, before the gold standard is initiated, we are going to get hurt. Definitely, if you do not own gold or silver, you'll definitely get hurt because the taxes will increase, your privacy will decrease, right? And governments will find one way or another to take what you've got because everything you've got is on the screen. Unfortunately, everything you have, everything you own, every asset that you own, except for one, is on the screen. Banks know what you have. Governments know what you have. They know where it is. There's your address. That's it, right? Something goes bad, they take what you've got. Banks can't lose with real estate, right? You can, but banks can't because they will just sell their property off. They don't care where you live after that. They just sell your property off and they will get the money that they need to cover the loss of the loan, right? So the important thing is, right, is to know where central banks are going. They will print more money until they can't, but the gold standard is coming. Now, what will happen with gold under a gold standard? Right now, it's $3,500 an ounce. It'll probably be by the end of this year, $4,000 or $4,500 an ounce. The following year, 2025, I think we'll have another boom every year. I think we've got 2 years of being booming, and it will probably go to $5,000 to $6,000 an ounce. Maybe more, but I don't like to exaggerate. But when we hit a gold standard, all governments around the world will have to revalue their currencies for how much gold that they own, right? Which will be part of the currency. That in turn will take that $6,000 gold in Australia, here in Australia, to $30,000 gold. It has no alternative. Because that's how much gold they'll need, or the value of gold. The value of gold, Australia digs out 320 tonne per year, 320 tonne. The world only digs out 3,000 tonne, right? We are the second or third largest mining supplier of gold in the world. We sell all our gold overseas, right? None stays in Australia, except the little bit that as good as gold buys to make their coins and bars and things like that. So all of our gold that we sell is Australian-made gold, but everything else goes overseas. So, and silver is not quite the same. We have one major silver mine. It's owned by BHP. That's okay, but BHP sell it to overseas buyers, so we don't have it. Our silver coins and bars has to be the raw material has to be brought in. Although we mine a fair bit of it in one place, we still have to import it in. That's silver. So what we have today is we have an economic climate where interest rates are not going to come down. They can't come down. We're printing too much money. The Federal Reserve is in between a rock and a hard place. If they reduce the interest rates, the US economy will take off again. That will cause inflation. If they reduce interest rates, yes, the interest rates on their debt is easy to pay. But then it comes back to foreigners, right? Foreigners won't want to see the inflation, and so the Americans won't be able to sell their US dollars to the overseas countries, right? And so they've got to find a way of how to manage their economy. They won't find the way. They've dug themselves too deep. The old expression, if you dig yourself into a hole, stop digging. But America doesn't. It just goes deeper, right? So the fact is, if you own gold and silver, you will be fine, right? There might be some tough times still, certainly for family who haven't got any gold and silver, but you will be fine. And nobody knows you have it. I mean, look, that's a fair enough statement. I mean, I talk about privacy issues, right? Privacy issues is important to me. Why should I have another identity out there knowing exactly what I'm worth, exactly where it is, so they can exactly tax me the way they want to? Why would I want that? Why would anybody want that? Right? I'm not saying I'm anti-tax. I'm saying less tax. Well, look, it'd be lovely not to pay any tax, but I don't think the economy works like that. In fact, what I'm trying to say here, I think something like less than 10% overall, straight out, 10% probably would be a good idea. No GSTs, none of that rubbish, right? Because that's all hidden taxes. You don't know where it's coming from. A straight out personal income tax of less than 10%, no more taxes, that's it. And the government has got to work within their means, right? And so bottom line here is that I like my privacy. It's a matter of what I want to do with my assets, my net worth, whatever, right? And I see over the next 5 years as the greatest opportunity that we'll ever have to accumulate real money, that is gold and silver. And unless you heed that information, I can't tell you any more. I'm just going to go to a little quote from a very high-powered business person, investor out of the United States. His name is Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio is probably worth between 18 to $20 billion. If you want to look at who's the big investors of Jeff Bezos and whatever, they're worth 100 billion or a little bit more, maybe 200 billion. But even Warren Buffett, great investor, he's worth around about 80 billion. So Ray Dalio is worth 20 billion. He's doing all right. That's 20,000 million, So he's doing okay. And this is what he said, quote, "If you don't own gold, there could only be two reasons. You haven't read history and you don't understand the role of gold in the monetary system." I mean, very powerful stuff. You've just got to become your own central bank. You've got to take control of your life, control of your money, making sure that money is gold and silver. As Good as Gold Australia, by the way, started 11 years ago with Darryl and myself after we had 2 years off. And we did have another 2 years where we were helping other engineering companies with that, from obviously because of our experiences. And some of them bought gold, some of them didn't. But the ones who didn't, they're not doing so well at the moment. But we started in 2013, right? 2013. and it's now 2020, coming up 24. So we're nearly 11 years old. We're 10 3/4 years, right? And we started Party Plan. Guys, it's nothing hard. Nothing hard about the way you start a business, right? You start simple and build yourself up, right? The gold and silver business is not an easy business to build in respect that you've got to have the knowledge. You've got to have the knowledge. I'm not talking about a coin shop here. I'm not talking about going into a shop and buying a couple of silver coins. I'm talking about building your heritage, building your asset base in a large way. So we started with silver coins. We didn't do anything but silver coins for 2 years on a party plan. Right? We came in with, we bought a little treasure chest and we covered it up with gold and blue materials, little silver coins, no, we didn't have any gold coins. Oh, yes, we did. We had chocolate coins. We had chocolate coins. That's where we did, because we didn't have the money. We had a little bit, but we weren't putting it into gold at that stage. We had chocolate coins of wrapped in gold foil. Anyway, so for 2 years, we just did silver coins, right? And what I'm explaining here is that today, if you have a look at my silver coins, 1 ounce, half ounce, even 1/10 ounce, so they're $7 each. I think $27 for a half ounce and nearly $50 for a 4 ounce. But I bought my ounces of coins a long time ago, and I have around about 1,500 1 ounce, and I have about 400 half ounce, right? But from that point onwards, after 2 years, I bought kilos of silver. Kilos of silver. They are the best silver value for money right now. But there's also a half kilo bar of silver. That's getting very close to being the best one. But I still like the kilo of silver. Now, if you're thinking of finding my address and robbing me, don't bother, because I don't keep it at home. If you want to know where you keep your silver and gold, we have, as Good as Gold Australia, run the largest storage vault in Australia, private vault in Australia. Obviously, the Perth Mint have their own vaulting services. There are a couple of other vaulting services around Australia, but most of the companies that deal in gold and silver don't have their own vaults, right? They push it off to somebody else to vault it for them. I don't like that. That's third party, right? That's another person controlling it. I don't like it. So in Adelaide, we have a very, very large vaulting service, right? So we have 50% of my assets are in that vault. It used to be interesting enough, Narita. The building used to be owned by the Reserve Bank of Australia. Not anymore, it isn't. But it is available for every private investor or private holder of gold and silver. So 50% of mine is there. 45% roughly is somewhere else. It's on a farm. I'll tell you that. It's on a farm. But that farm is not in Adelaide, let me tell you. But this particular person has a lot of farming land. He's a great friend. And so we get along extremely well together. So that's where the majority of the other is held, right? And the other little bit is in a safe, not at my home, but close by. So all in all, you just got to say to yourself, do I save in silver and gold, real money, or do I save in currency? Your currency is being deflated, not at 3.5%, but more like 9 to 10 or 11%. Inflation will take care of your reserves, right? If it's in a bank account. Bank accounts, well, as I said, I don't mind bank managers. I do not like central bankers, but we must have a look at banking internally, right? Our banks have got certain laws that we can't deny, and I just personally don't think that my money currency is safe in a bank. Right, so I look for other avenues, and if you take your notes and bury them under the bed or whatever the case may be, that's all right. But inflation will make it smaller each year. Right, you want to put it into some gold and silver. Probably haven't discussed one thing yet, but maybe we end with this, or we may not. It depends on how much Narita has got for me. But the question is, how much do I buy? Where do I stop? When do I stop buying gold and silver? I could ask the question, when do you stop saving? My personal opinion is that you never stop saving. Do not spend 100% of everything you take home. Always have a savings plan. Always. Never go through life without a savings plan. Just make sure your savings are in real money. Right. But how much money should you have? One of the gentlemen that we talk to regularly is a gentleman called, not Alistair McLeod, he's the top man, but Egon von Grauss. He's out of Switzerland, and he runs the largest vault in the world, in actual fact. The vault used to be built within the mountains of Switzerland, right? And the army, or the armed forces, the defense department used to have this particular rows and rows of tunnels in the mountains. So he developed a vault within these tunnels, and he's shown a little bit of video but nobody knows where it is. But he shows you the amount of there's gold and silver there. But anyway, Egon von Grauss' answer to how much should you own? Whatever you cannot afford to lose. Whatever you cannot afford to lose. So I would say to anybody, at least 1/3 of every savings plan that you've got should be in gold and silver. But today we have treacherous times. We don't know what China's going to do. We don't know what America's going to do. We don't even know what our government is going to do in changing things around. Cryptocurrencies or CBDCs, other ways in which they're talking about to control the money supply, control you. We just don't know. So I would say maybe 1/3, at least 1/3. But I don't have 1/3. I have much more, right? And the reason why I have much more, because the next 5 years are going to be volcanic, right? There's going to be explosions everywhere. I know gold and silver is just going to go for a rip, right? So the plan is to have as maximum amount as I think I should have. And when the time is right, when all this volatility is over, I then plan to buy certain investments. And those investments will be worth much less then than they are now. Right? One of those investments, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is farming land. I want to buy some farming land. I don't want to buy a residential house. The government takes too much control over it. Right? But farming land, everybody has to eat. I'd like to buy some farming land with my friend who has a farm. And so in that way, but I'm not buying now. It's too dear. There are worldwide companies buying up South Australian and Australian land, but no, I know in South Australia, and they're paying oodles for it. So there's farmers coming out. They've been paid $1 million, $2 million, $3 million for their farming land. So what I'll suggest, if you are in the farming community, I think you should put some of that, if you're selling, I think you should put some of that into gold and silver. You might be able to buy that farming land back, or for your children at a much cheaper price. I think you probably will, not if, but will. So that's what I would suggest you do. Look, and the other thing is too, and I'm not a financial advisor. Don't take me as anything but an experienced businessman who's recognised that manufacturing is dead and buried, and there's a lot of volatility ahead, right? And to make sure I don't go down with the others and that volatility, I'm putting my real currency and my real savings into gold and silver. And so at the end of the day, you've just got to say, okay, how much silver, how much gold? If you want to give me a call, you can. I'm sure Narita will give you my number. We have a 1300 number on our website, which is asgoodasgoldaustralia.com. You can Google it and find out. There's a 1300 number there, so you can ring that. or if Narita wants to, if she thinks you're a nice person, which I'm sure you all will be, she can hand out my personal mobile number. I may not take it straight away, may not take the call straight away, but the number's there. I will always phone you back. And if I do miss out, phone me again. Just phone me again. So Narita, I think that's about it for the time being. Just remember that because we can't reduce debt worldwide, Australia-wide, any-wide. We cannot reduce debt in the world because we are printing too much money. And that's the reason why the debt's going up. You always have to pay interest. It doesn't matter whether you borrow $1, $20, $100, $1,000, $5,000, $5 million, $5 billion. It doesn't matter. You always have to print more to pay the interest. Thank you, Narita, for giving me some time. I don't know how much was it, approximately, about an hour and a half. So, thank you very much, Narita. I know I did a lot of the talking. I'm sure there'll be questions that people will get back to you with. You can email me, or people can, as I said, contact me, and we can go from there.
Yeah, no, that it's been so great, Brian. And I love listening to all your wisdom. And I know that everyone tuning in will love to listen to it as well, because you've got to understand the history and everything behind it in order to make the best decisions. And when you have the knowledge, that's when you can do it. So we'll absolutely put all your details in the description so anyone can contact you, and they can leave comments if they've got any questions, and reach out to you directly through the website, like you said, asgoodasgoldaustralia.com, and there's the 1300 number on there as well too, so everything will be linked. Brian, it's just been awesome having you on here today. I so appreciate your time. I want to thank as well you at home for tuning in. I hope you have got so much out of this episode. It has been a pearler. Hope your brain's ticking over. I'm sure you've got lots of things to think about, lots of questions and all that sort of stuff as well. So thank you for being here. Leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that sort of fun stuff like we always do. But again, thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for being here and for your time today.
Thank you very much. Thoroughly enjoyed.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian.